Good evening. I'm Carlo Jimenez. I'm a vice chairman for Fort Bend County Republican Party. I want to thank you all for attending the 2019 Lincoln-Reagan dinner. I know a lot of y'all could have been somewhere else, but you decided to be here tonight because, let's face it, this is more fun, right? So tonight I have the honor and privilege of presenting or introducing Congressman Dan Crenshaw. And for me, it's a privilege doing this because he's a fellow Navy veteran just like myself. So Congressman Dan Crenshaw is a native Houstonian, sixth-generation Texan, and something I didn't know about him before is that he speaks Spanish. And as many of you already know, he's a United States Navy SEAL. Congressman Dan Crenshaw, when he was a Navy SEAL, went on 5 combat deployments. During such, he received many medals, even receiving the Citation of Valor. So please help me welcome Congressman Dan Crenshaw tonight.
When you elect a millennial, this is what you get. You get Instagrammed all the time. All right. Say goodbye to everybody. It's great to be with you all. Tonight I want to talk about the future of the American character. I want to talk about the American character because I believe that we're in a culture war. The culture war has a lot of different fronts, and we're going to talk about those a little bit. But if we care about the policies that we want, then we have to be concerned about the politics, because policy is downstream of politics, but politics is downstream of culture. And I think sometimes we've forgotten about that, and we've forgotten about the traditions that make our country great, that Ronald Reagan and President Lincoln fought for. So the reason we gather here, the reason we come together under the name of President Ronald Reagan and Abraham Lincoln is to remind ourselves of the American character, the American ethos, the driving force behind the great American experiment that has created more prosperity and freedom than any other endeavor in human history. We gather here because we are grateful. We're grateful for a country that enshrined and protected God-given rights into our governing system and cherished the timeless principles of limited government, liberty, sovereignty of the individual and country, protection of property rights, and the notion that God is the ultimate moral authority. We gather here because we have to, because these principles, once labeled liberal principles, and now almost exclusively conservative, are under attack. They're under attack from an increasingly radical form of leftism, the ideology of progressivism. Progressivism is radical change for the sake of change itself. It's a belief that human nature can be transformed and controlled by government, that the sovereignty of the individual can and should be subsumed by the collective will, resulting in a utopian model or vision of the progressive elite. Put more simply, it's the pursuit of power under the guise of well-intentioned progress. The problem here is that there's no foreseeable limit to such progress, and no basis upon which to judge whether that progress is ultimately good, because there's no foundational principles guiding such radical change. They use identity politics to divide people and victim hierarchies to silence arguments against them, because if you aren't a victim, then you have no right to an opinion. They convince groups of their oppression, and further convince them that the progressive is the champion of the oppressed. Progressivism leads to ever-increasing government control of our lives and removal of our freedoms. And unfortunately, it's also the natural, inevitable result of liberalism, because liberalism gives progressives the moral excuses they need to take action and pursue power at all costs. But we can't just point out the faults in progressive movement. We have to remind people of the good American principles that have served our country so well. The principles that drive our ethos and create the American character. The American founding is not necessarily encoded into our DNA. What is in our DNA is actually all of those counterculture principles: tribalism, identity politics, an emphasis on feelings and instincts instead of individual freedom. That's human nature. It has been for tens of thousands of years. It was only in the last couple hundred years that we grew out of it. And sometimes we forget that we have to protect it. So for us to effectively defend the cultural foundations that made our country so great, we have to tell people what they are, and more crucially, show them why they are so vitally important. Because these points I'm about to tell you are about the American character, our culture. As we know, politics is downstream of culture, and policy is downstream of politics. And we have to start with the culture if we're ever going to get to the policy. So here's some ideas about the American character that I've been thinking about. Number one, the American character is one of personal responsibility. Yeah, you've heard that before, but we don't always make an argument for why this is so important. It's important because it's the only human attribute that can lead to self-empowerment. To be empowered is arguably the most crucial pillar of human success, and it is solely derived from a sense of responsibility, a sense that you are responsible for your actions and that you succeed based on your merits. So according to Pew Research, in European countries like Germany, 69% believe success or failure is determined by forces outside their control. In America, only 43% believe that, which is probably too many. And I have a feeling far fewer conservatives believe that to be the case. Believing your success is outside your control is an enormous problem. When people stop believing they are in charge of their own destiny, they become disempowered. When you're disempowered, you lose all incentive to work, to improve, to contribute. Why does this matter? Well, it's a question of sustainability. If more and more people stop taking responsibility, eventually we run out of people to pick up the slack. If you have a world of individuals always waiting for help, demanding assistance, what does that do to a society? Well, for starters, we become a society that is easily bought off by promises of more government programs: free college, free healthcare, free housing, guaranteed jobs. It's an unsustainable cultural trend when government replaces the need for human incentive. Attacks on the free market itself can become justified because a free market system requires personal responsibility by definition. A society can only last so long before we run out of responsible people to take care of the irresponsible. Number two, the American character is mentally tough. It is disciplined. It is competitive. Being mentally tough is about the stories we tell ourselves. Do the injustices that we face make us crumble, or do they harden our resolve? Do we tell stories of victimhood about how unfair life is, or how the system is rigged against us? Or do we tell a story of facing adversity and then overcoming it? The mental toughness is also about discipline. A culture that exhibits discipline and self-control is a culture that thrives. Are you able to avoid indulgence? Save your money for rent instead of recreation? Can you balance work and play? Can you buckle down, delay gratification, and exhibit self-control in order to achieve your goals? A society can only withstand so many individuals who are overly indulgent, undisciplined, and reckless. The more of those we get, the more mentally tough and disciplined the rest of us have to be. This inevitably leads to resentment. And a resentful culture is unsustainable. And again, it leads to socialism. Because if you can't be mentally tough and disciplined, then you can't compete in the free market. And if you can't compete, then you will want to live off the hard work of others. And the notion of socialism starts to become pretty appealing. Number three, Americans have a sense of duty. By this I mean there's a sense of loyalty to our own country, and specifically our country's founding ideals. In other words, patriotism. We have an identity as a country. It's founded on ideas. We strive to be connected by those certain set of ideals, and they're based on our founding documents and embodied by the American flag and the national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance. Notice I didn't say skin color or heritage or religion or socioeconomic status. I said ideas. Because the only colors that matter are the red, white, and blue. And if you lose sight of these founding ideals, then you end up with a country that is only connected by the fact that we happen to live in the same geographic area. This is the meaning of a pluribus unum, of many one, and it's the opposite of identity-driven politics. It's the opposite of tribalism and multiculturalism. When this sense of loyalty to things that bring us together is eroded, and the American spirit itself is eroded. And it also has policy implications as it pertains to how we think about how we protect our rules of law and our sovereignty. For instance, if we believe in loyalty to our country, then we're likely to believe in securing our borders and protecting our sovereignty. We got some pro-wall people in here, I'm assuming? I wasn't sure. If you don't subscribe to any sense of loyalty to your country or the rule of law that keeps it in order, well, then an open border policy, Beto, starts to sound pretty good. I got him to say that, by the way. I want credit for that. That was my tweet. Because why bother to protect the physical borders of a country that you don't even believe in? If you don't love your country, then why bother protecting it? I'm going to go off on a quick tangent here talking about the culture war. There was a video that came out in California. It was a woman who had previously worked for the Santa Barbara Community College. And she was upset that during their meetings they no longer did the Pledge of Allegiance. And so she went to a hearing for the committee, and she wanted to stand up and say something about it. And then during her talk, she pulled up a little flag and she started giving the Pledge of Allegiance. And behind all the board members, for some reason, there was a bunch of activists, these left-wing progressives, not liberals. You got to distinguish between liberals and progressives. They're different. Liberals we disagree with. Progressives are something different, something worse. They shouted her down and they screamed at her, they were snarling at her, and she's giving the Pledge of Allegiance and she's practically crying as she's doing it because she's seeing her country being ripped away from her. And so we tweeted at her today. And I invited her to the Capitol to give the Pledge of Allegiance. And she accepted. Number 4, the American character is virtuous. We are charitable. We are moral. We show respect and kindness. We're grateful for the Judeo-Christian history that provides us with those set of morals. And this is important, to recognize where our morality comes from and why it can't be changed or traded away. Because even if you don't believe in God, it's undeniable that our morality is derived from Judeo-Christian tradition and history. But it turns out we do need God to explain our morality. God is absolute, and therefore our morality is absolute. If there is no God, then our morality can be changed according to human preference. And if morality can be changed according to human preference, as it often is in secular societies, then the human mind can justify anything, from the horrors of the Holocaust to the debilitating impacts of communism. Secularism simply is not sustainable. So we strive to be morally good and kind and fair and charitable. But we are charitable with other people's money, as a socialist would be. We're charitable in our own hearts, with our own resources. We as Americans are more likely to give to charity than any other country. And states like this are far more likely to give to charity than blue states. Deep down we know that if we aren't willing to help our own neighbor and instead rely on the government to do it, then we have a society in decay, and a society that cannot possibly last. Number 5, the American character is about liberty. It's about individual freedom and the ability to self-govern. I don't have to explain that a whole lot for y'all, but I do believe it's worth pointing out that you can't have freedom without all of the other values I just listed. They're firmly woven into the cultural narrative that we tell ourselves. Because if you're not personally responsible, then you're not empowered. And if you're not empowered, you cannot possibly be mentally tough. And if you're not mentally tough, you can't possibly survive in a competitive, free society. If you're not personally responsible, then by definition, you believe others should be responsible for you, thus infringing on their freedoms. So say goodbye to liberty. If you can't take personal responsibility, then it is highly unlikely that you would take responsibility for the country or feel any sense of duty towards that country. So say goodbye to another foundational bedrock, patriotism. And finally, if we're not moral people with concrete, unchangeable virtues, then how on earth can we be trusted with freedom? All of these elements build on one another. They are required. There might be more, but it's a good start. These values aren't new to you either. Even, again, liberals live by them, but they won't defend them. It's conservatives who need to defend them, but we haven't been making a strong enough case. So what is that case? Well, the best and simplest answer for why we need these values is this. It builds a sustainable and enduring society. Sustainability of our society should be our strongest argument for why the conservative cultural perspective is the right one. We, conservatives, must remind Americans that the countercultural values of the left can only exist as a weight on the back of traditional values. So taking responsibility for others, as the socialist wants, can only occur on the backs of those who first take responsibility for themselves. These cultural foundations are also the foundations on which our Constitution is built. You see, our Constitution was designed with specific characteristics in mind. A primacy on individual freedom, protection of personal property, and local government control versus centralized power. Our system of governance is designed for a certain kind of culture, the people that can properly function within that design. And if you are not personally responsible, mentally tough, patriotic, and virtuous, then you can't thrive within our constitutional republic. And it eventually breaks apart. Those cultural principles created the constitutional principles. And together they created the most prosperous and freest society the world has ever known, where we live without fear of an overwhelming government telling us how to work, how to spend our money, how to run our businesses, or worse, what we can think or say. It's up to conservatives to remind Americans that our country is a compilation of the best ideas that humankind ever had. The lessons of Jerusalem, of Rome, of Athens, and London, they were encapsulated in Philadelphia by the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. Where we wrote down our unalienable rights and said that the purpose of government was to simply protect those rights, not change them. That's why we gathered here tonight. Because if we don't define our own principles and remind the world why they matter and why they are correct, then we lose the spirit of the American experiment. So we gather here because we aren't about to let that happen. Because America is the greatest idea that humankind ever had, and we aren't about to let it be squandered. So God bless you. God bless America. God bless Texas. And thank you for being here.